Welcome to video 2 in this rhythm lecture series. In this video, I'm going to be carrying on the natural progression of the fundamental concepts and discussing subdivisions. Subdivisions require an understanding of the beat, of meter, of possibly time signatures discussed in the first video, so if you feel unsure on any of those things, I would encourage you to watch that video first. But conceptually, subdivisions are the next step and are absolutely required understanding for virtually all other forms of rhythmic apparatus, as we shall see. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing three broad topics: the nature of subdivisions themselves, subdivisions as the basis for all rhythm, and tuplets, a specific type of subdivision. Now, tuplets are quite a deep topic and will in the future have a video of themselves, of their own, in which I will discuss them in far more depth, but they require a little bit of discussion today, so we'll briefly discuss tuplets and how they link to subdivisions generally. Now, we can consider rhythm essentially as a game of division. All aspects of rhythm can be broken down into a process of division. We talked last time about the concept of a beat. Now, we can essentially describe the beat as being a division of a span of time. So if we take any given time span, we can divide it evenly using a beat. And the frequency of the beat is determined by the tempo, such that a higher tempo means that those beats occur more frequently, which means the actual divisions are smaller. The more parts we divide a circle into, the smaller each part has to become. Now, a subdivision divides the space between a beat, hence the name subdivision. So where the beat divides time, subdivisions divide the beat. Now, because the beat is determined by the time, that span of time is consistent. The space between every beat remains the same. Therefore, when we insert a subdivision into it, the value, the relative value of all of the other subdivisions is derived from that starting point. What this means in real terms is that a higher subdivision has a faster perceived rhythm than a lower subdivision. Whatever the space of time between the beats, if we divide it in half, if we then subsequently divide it into sixths, those sixths are going to be faster, occur more frequently than the halves. We have more notes to fit in, the higher the subdivision. Now, it is important to state at this early stage that there is no inherent link between a subdivision and a note type. We will get onto note types later on, but in conceptual terms, a subdivision is not linked inherently to a certain type of note. We can simply talk in terms of a number. A 2-note subdivision describes dividing the beat into 2. A 4-note subdivision describes dividing the beat into 4. A 9-note subdivision describes dividing the beat into 9, and again, assuming a consistent tempo, the higher the subdivision, the more notes we have to fit into the same space of time, the faster they become. And again, it is implied, in fact, in the case of subdivisions, it is imperative that those divisions are evenly spaced. So when we talk about a 9-note subdivision, those 9 notes are evenly divided throughout the bar. We are dividing throughout the beat. We are dividing the beat into even ninths. Now, rhythm can be generated in this way. If I take a simple beat, again, I don't need to talk in terms of a note value or a time signature, just in terms of a beat or a subdivision, I can create a simple rhythm by playing 2 subdivisions next to each other. And I can choose any 2, but for simplicity, I will choose 2 and 4. So I will be dividing the beat into 2, and then I will be dividing the beat into 4. Because the beat is the same, the tempo is consistent, the 4 will be perceived as faster, specifically twice as fast as the 2. One, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. We can hear there a very simple rhythm generated solely from subdivisions. We didn't need any talk of a note value. We didn't need any talk of a time signature. We simply talked in terms of the subdivisions themselves. So to reiterate, if the beat and the tempo are the same, the greater the subdivision, the faster the relative rhythm will be because there are more notes to fit into the same space of time. Any rhythm requires a beat and a subdivision. We can't conceivably create a rhythm without these 2 factors. So we can think of subdivisions as being the basis point for plotting a rhythm, and we can call this concept a subdivision grid, or the subdivision on which a rhythm is based. Now, to outline this, the grid, the subdivision on which a rhythm is based, is defined by the lowest note value within the rhythm. So to talk about this coherently, we need to bring in the concept of meter. We need to bring in time signatures, and we need to bring in note values and see how this all links together. Now, I stated in no uncertain terms that subdivision is not inherently linked to note value. That is, until we present it in a metric context. So let's discuss what I mean by this. We're going to create the metric context by saying we are now working in 4/4. Now, this is a time signature, tells us there are 4 beats to the bar, or specifically 4 quarter notes to the bar, and that those quarter notes are representing the beat. As soon as we have taken this step, as soon as we have generated a metric context, our subdivisions gain value, specifically note values. And those note values are defined by the metric context. So what does all this mean? Well, as we have stated, 4/4 tells us there are 4 quarter notes every bar, and those quarter notes are representing the beat. So the tempo refers to the quarter note. The higher the tempo, the faster those quarter notes are occurring. Now, because of the nature of quarter notes, we know by definition that it divides into 2 eighth notes. So our 2-note subdivision now has a value, eighth notes, derived from the fact that quarter notes divide by definition into eighth notes. We know that a quarter note by definition divides into 4 16th notes. So 16th notes now take on the note value of a 4-note subdivision. Again, we know that by definition, a quarter note divides into 8 32nd notes. So our 8-note subdivision is now occupied by 32nd notes, represented by 32nd notes. This representation is unique to the metric context. If we change the time signature completely, those note values will change, as we shall see. So there is no inherent link between, say, a 2-note subdivision and eighth notes. That is only in the context of 4/4. We will explore this a little bit later on. Now, with this established, we can return to this concept of grids, subdivisions on which a rhythm is based. When we want to plot any rhythm within our metric context, we need to create a subdivision grid which matches the lowest value that occurs in the rhythm we are trying to plot. This all sounds like a bit of a mouthful, so we can explore what this actually means with a note value, with an example. Let's say I want to plot the rhythm of Mary Had a Little Lamb. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. It's a very, very simple rhythm that I want to write down, and I want to use note value, and I want to understand it from a rhythmic concept. Well, the first thing I need to do is establish a beat. I need to place the beat at a suitable point that relates to the rhythm that I'm trying to plot. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. Now, it is vitally important to stress here that that beat is not a correct placement, it is just the most simple. It is just the most suitable. We will explore in much later videos how this can be completely subverted, and the same perceptible rhythm of Mary Had a Little Lamb could be plotted as a completely different subdivision against a beat that occurs in a completely different place. But that is far beyond the scope of this video. For now, I would imagine most people, musicologists or not, would agree that the simplest place to feel the beat of that rhythm, Mary had a little lamb. Now, of course, we can double this, Mary had a little lamb, or we can half it, Mary had a little lamb. But because of the nature of division, simplicity, they are actually equivalent. So there is no real difference between Mary had a little lamb, Mary had a little lamb, or Mary had a little lamb. They're all just equivalent, and I'm feeling that beat is either a double or a half time, or perhaps the most common time. Bit of a diversion there, but for our current purposes, we are feeling Mary had a little lamb, Mary had a little lamb. Now, in placing the beat like that, we have essentially generated a subdivision for every note of that rhythm. And we shall hear that the lowest subdivision required to plot that rhythm is 2. We don't need anything higher or lower than that because the rhythm is so simple. Mary had a little lamb, little lamb. We take this back into our metric context of 4/4. We know that a 2-note subdivision is represented by eighth notes. We can now say that this Mary Had a Little Lamb rhythm is based on an eighth note subdivision. That's another way of saying that the lowest note value that occurs in that rhythm is an eighth note. Therefore, we don't need anything lower than an eighth note to plot the rhythm. What does this mean in practical terms? Well, if we're in the context of 4/4, here is our beat. I can play the entirety of Mary Had a Little Lamb by counting eighth notes, and we will find that every stroke of the rhythm aligns with my count of an eighth note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and Mary had a little lamb, little lamb, little lamb. We can hopefully clearly hear there that every syllable of the rhythm, every note of the rhythm aligns with an eighth note. So where it comes to this rhythmic grid, the concept of subdivisions as a grid, we can conceive of them as occurring in the background as empty slots into which we place the note of a rhythm. Kind of like one of those child's toys where there are empty slots and you have to match the shape. Only the correct shape will fit through. Now I visualize this as kind of like empty slots, as I said. And if we take our beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we think of the subdivision we want to plot our rhythm with, we can divide that beat by counting it and imagining each syllable of the count as a possible slot into which to place a note of the rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and with that occurring, every note I play must align with one of those counts. So to show you what I mean, if I improvise a simple rhythm based on eighth notes, in my mind I am hearing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Every note of the rhythm I just played was either a number or an and. It aligned with part of that two-note subdivision. So because the nature of the Mary Had a Little Lamb rhythm is so simple, we don't need anything other than eighth notes. We could, in theory, plot it on a 16th note grid or a 32nd note grid, but it would simply be redundant. We don't need those extra slots. If we always aim for simplicity, we can use the lowest subdivision required by the lowest note that occurs in the rhythm. So we can explore a second example here to show this. And let's take a slightly more advanced rhythm, the clave. Now, for those who aren't familiar, a clave is what we consider a world rhythm. It is a heritage rhythm that can be traced back an awful long way through a lot of different cultures and parts of the world. But in very simple terms, it sounds like this. I'm sure you will have all heard it in some form. Now, the characteristics of that rhythm, the definition of it as a clave, is determined by the spacing between the notes. We can perceive the relationship of the notes relative to each other. This means that we know it is a clave rhythm because of how far apart those notes are relative to each other. In other words, it doesn't matter whether I play this rhythm fast or slow, quickly or slowly, it will still sound like a clave because the relative spacing of those notes stays the same. So if I play it really fast, it still sounds the same as if I play it really slowly. Because the relative ratio between the 5 notes of the clave stays consistent. It needs to stay the same. So as we did with Mary Had a Little Lamb, the first thing we need to do in order to plot this clave in rhythmic terms is to assign where the position of the beat falls. Now, as we said, there are many ways we can do this, but the simplest way is as follows. And this is the way musicologists describe the clave as well, with 4 even parts of the beat occurring across the 5 notes of the clave. So my cross stick here is representing the beat, and my right hand is playing the clave itself. And we can hear how the notes of that clave align with the notes of the beat. Now, as we have said, when we plot this, we need to keep the ratio consistent between the 5 notes of that rhythm for it to remain recognizable as a clave. Now, it will hopefully be becoming somewhat clear here that we cannot plot that rhythm on the same 8th note grid on which we plotted Mary Had a Little Lamb. In simple terms, we will find there aren't enough slots. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 4 of the 5 notes aligned with my 8th note count, but the second note did not. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So by counting 8th notes, I have not got enough slots to account for all 5 notes of that clave while retaining the correct ratio between all of the notes. So, because that second note occurred halfway between eighth notes, we can double the eighth notes to 16th notes, and we should now find that all 5 notes of the clave align with a note of a 16th note grid. 1 E under, 2 E under, 3 E under, 4 E under, 1 E under, 2 E under, 3 E under, 4 E under. And there we have it. We have managed to plot our clave rhythm using a 16th note subdivision, or we could say a 4-note subdivision. We don't necessarily need to place it in a 4/4 quarter note based context. Interestingly, a lot of musicologists will plot rhythm on a circle with points of a circle representing the slots and the notes of the circle filled in to represent the notes of the rhythm. Now, when they represent a clave in this manner, there are 16 slots around the circle and 5 of them are filled in. And this represents the 16 even points of a clave, which represent the subdivision. 1 E under, 2 E under, 3 E under, 4 E under, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Can't count fast enough. But we conceive of the ratio between the notes of a clave as groupings. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, for that to make sense, the subdivision needs to be consistent, evenly spaced, and musicologists will use a 16-point circle to plot this. It is no coincidence, therefore, that we have found 16th notes as the most effective manner on which to plot our clave. So, in simple terms, we have plotted our 8th note rhythm, we have plotted our Mary Had a Little Lamb rhythm with 8th notes, and we have plotted our clave rhythm with 16th notes, and they are the lowest possible subdivisions we can get away with to account for all notes in the rhythm. Of course, the more complex the rhythm, the more complex the subdivision we will need to use to plot it. Now, as a short aside here, it's worth stating that rests count towards the subdivision. We don't need to fill every note of the subdivision with an audible note. And this is the case with the clave, as we just saw. Even though it is based on the 16th note subdivision, only 5 notes are played in total, not all 16 of the bar. Now, drummers will often play the whole subdivision as well as accents to generate the rhythm. So if we consider quiet strokes to be playing the subdivision, that's representing the 16 slots of our subdivision, and I can play the clave as accents on top of that. Now, felt as a 4-note subdivision. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or, within the context, felt as 16th notes. 1 E under, 2 E under, 3 E under, 4 E under, 1 E under, 2 E under, 3 E under, 4 E under. By playing it in that way, it demonstrates the juxtaposition between the notes and the 16th note slots. If we want the rhythm only, those filler notes are silenced. 1 E under, 2 E under, 3 E under, 4 E under, 1 E under, 2 E under, 3 E under, 4 E under, 2 E under, 3 E under, 4 E under. Now, this is where a lot of confusion comes in for younger students or beginning students, where a subdivision may be not the one they expect. So let me show you what I mean. Let's say we've got a steady beat like this, and I have a rhythm that sounds like this. And then I ask the student, what is the subdivision? Now, for most of them, the first time of asking, they will say 3, because they are counting 3 notes per beat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And they always look a little bit puzzled when I tell them that 3 is incorrect. That is based on a 4-note subdivision. How can this be? Well, the answer is rests. We can hear that the 3rd note has a longer pause after it than what came before. So we can think of this as short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long, short, short, long. We can hear a longer pause after the 3rd note. That is because it is based on a 4-note subdivision, the 4th of which is silenced. So it's like saying 1, 2, 3, rest, 1, 2, 3, rest, 1, 2, 3, rest, where that 4th note of the subdivision is silenced. So we can count that rhythm on a 16th note grid. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and Even though it is based on a 4-note subdivision, there are still only 3 notes audible. So this can be a source of confusion in some students, at least when they start tackling this material. as to the way the notes they are hearing relate to the notes of the subdivision on which the rhythm is based. The answer almost always comes down to rests. Now, as we know, if we have a rest, we can change the note value before to get rid of the rest. So rather than thinking of that rhythm as being 16th note, 16th note, 16th note, 16th note rest, we can think of it as 16th note, 16th note, 8th note, and that 8th note includes the rest. But the fact of the 8th note does not get rid of the fact that it's based on a 16th note grid. Remember, the subdivision grid is determined by the lowest note in the rhythm, and the lowest note in this rhythm is the 16th note, so this rhythm requires a 16th note to be played. This leads us nicely into our final topic then, tuplets. Subdivisions are native to the time signature. So once we have a time signature established, we get the value of all our native subdivisions derived from the note values used. So sticking with 4/4, we have the nature of the beat decided for us. The quarter note represents the beat. So because the quarter note represents the beat, 8th notes, which divide it in half, represent 2-note subdivisions. Divide in half again, and we get 4 16th notes. Divide in half again, we get 8 32nd notes. So because they are simple acts of dividing in half, we can say that 2, 4, and 8, 8th notes, 16th notes, and 32nd notes, are the native subdivisions of 4/4. If we take a ternary time signature, like 12/8, that is different. Each beat is represented by a dotted quarter note. That dotted quarter note, by definition, contains 3 8th notes, providing as a 3-note subdivision. That therefore contains 6 16th notes, which is a 6-note subdivision. That therefore contains 12 32nd notes, which is a 12-note subdivision. So in simple terms, binary time signatures with a 4 on the bottom have as their native subdivisions 2, 4, and 8. Ternary time signatures like 6/8 and 12/8 have native subdivisions of 3, 6, and 12. In both cases, these occur because of the natural divisions of the note values used to represent the beat. Binary time signatures use quarter notes to represent the beat, quarter notes to 2 8th notes to 4 16th notes to 8 32nd notes. Ternary time signatures use a dotted quarter note to represent the beat, containing 3 8th notes, 6 16th notes, 12 32nd notes. So in either case, what happens when we want to use a subdivision that is not part of that native list? Sticking with 4/4 for now, what happens if we want to use a 3-note subdivision? Well, we can't naturally arrive at a 3-note subdivision because there is no note value that represents thirds in 4/4. There is no note value that on its own represents a third of a quarter note. Remember, a 3-note subdivision divides our beat into thirds. So if our beat is quarter notes, we're dividing a quarter note into thirds. And there is no note value in our hierarchy that achieves that. It is a non-native subdivision. So to achieve this, we use a tuplet, specifically a triplet. And this is essentially a modifier. And we shall explore in the tuplet video how this actually creates a polyrhythm, but I'm not going to get onto that now. In very simple terms, a tuplet states one thing, x in the space of y, and it modifies what's already there to create the subdivision we want. So what does that mean? Well, we have quarter notes. Quarter notes divide into 2 8th notes, but we want a third. We want 3. So we start with our 2 8th notes and we insert a tuplet which says 3 in the space of 2. Because this occurs as part of the 8th note, we can extend that to say 3 8th notes in the space of 2 8th notes. And it's a simple bracket with the ratio written in, 3 8th notes in the space of 2 8th notes. And that is essentially a little marker, a little modifier that says we have 2 8th notes, but we're going to fit 3 into the same space of time. Because this is a division, those divisions are equal, so these are even thirds. So we now have 3 evenly spaced 8th notes in the space of 2. So we have gone from 1 and 2 and 3 and to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and because there is now an extra note to fit in. The value has shrunk slightly, the speed has increased slightly, the speed of the rhythm relative to the beat. 3 is a higher number than 2, so a 3-note subdivision is slightly faster than a 2-note subdivision. An 8th-note triplet, each note of that triplet is worth slightly less than a normal 8th note, so it occurs slightly faster. So what of something like a 5-note subdivision? Well, we have 4 16th notes. We can then apply a quintuplet bracket over that that says 5 16th notes in the space of 4. So instead of 1 e and 2 e and, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have one extra 16th note to fit in, the duration shrinks, the value shrinks, the speed increases slightly. So a 5-note subdivision, a quintuplet, is slightly faster than non-quintuplet 16th notes because there's one extra to fit in. So generally speaking, where tuplets are concerned, they occur based on the most recent native subdivision. What does that mean? So we start with quarter notes. If we want triplets, we can use a quarter note triplet. It's based on the quarter note itself. We will deal with those another day. Let's now jump to a 2-note subdivision, 8th notes. We have triplets which are based on 8th notes, so they are 8th note triplets. Then a 4-note subdivision arrives, and a 4-note subdivision is a native subdivision. We don't need a tuplet for it, so 4 16th notes. Now, because 4 16th notes were the most recent native subdivision, the next tuplet, the 5-note subdivision, is based on quintuplets. So where a triplet said 3 8th notes in the space of 2, a quintuplet says 5 16th notes in the space of 4. 6 is not a native subdivision, so that requires a tuplet, 6 16th notes in the space of 4. 7 is not a native subdivision, so it requires a tuplet, 7 16th notes in the space of 4. And then finally, we get to 8 32nd notes. It's a new native subdivision, the note value changes. So when we go up again to a 9-note subdivision, we need a tuplet, and it is based on 32nd notes. So a non-uplet, as it is called, a 9-note tuplet says 9 32nd notes in the space of 8. The subdivision of the tuplet always refers to the most recent native subdivision. So how does this apply in a ternary time signature? Well, as we've said, in 12/8, for example, we already have native thirds, native sixths, and native twelfths. So these are not tuplets. In 12/8, we already have 3 8th notes to the bar. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. They are not triplets because they occur as a native subdivision of a dotted quarter note. So what happens then if we want to play 4 evenly spaced notes in a bar of 12/8? Well, 4 is a non-native subdivision of 12/8, so we have to use a tuplet. It is based on the most recent non-native subdivision, which is 3. So we have what's called a quadruplet. So these are 4 8th notes in the space of 3. Previously, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 e and 2 e and 3 e and 4 e and 1 and 2 and. It's slightly faster, just in the same way of 4/4 going from 8th notes to triplets. The triplets are slightly faster. Here, we're going from 8th notes, of which there are already 3, into 4 8th notes in the same space of time. That 4th 8th note means we have to play them slightly faster. The value shrinks, the duration decreases, so they occur faster. So in 12/8, ternary time, we have a natural 3 already, so we have a quadruplet for 4. 4 8th notes in the space of 3. Then when we have a 5-note subdivision, it's non-native, so that still refers to 8th notes. So we can have a quintuplet 8th note, 5 8th notes in the space of 3. Then, when we get to 6, it's a native subdivision, 6 16th notes. 7 would be 7 16th notes in the space of 6. 8 16th notes in the space of 6. 9 16th notes in the space of 6. 10 in the space of 6. 11 in the space of 6, if we wanted an 11 tuplet in 12/8 for some reason. And then finally, we get to the next native subdivision, which is 12. So, to simplify this, in binary time signatures like 4/4, the only native subdivisions are 2, 4, and 8, and then 16 and 32 if you wanted to carry on. So every subdivision outside of 2, 4, and 8 requires a tuplet. That tuplet corresponds to the most recent native subdivision. If we want a 5, the most recent native subdivision is 4, so it's a 5-note quintuplet based on 16th notes. In 12/8, for example, 3, 6, and 12 are the native subdivisions, so any subdivision outside of that requires a tuplet. This is why another aspect of confusion for some people is why 3-note subdivisions are sometimes triplets and are sometimes not. It all comes down to the underlying time signature, which determines the native subdivisions. So if your time signature is binary with a 4 on the bottom, 3, 4, 5, 4, 7, 4, 23, 4, as long as that bottom number is a 4, Any 3-note subdivision has to be a tuplet because we cannot natively derive a 3-note subdivision from quarter notes. Conversely, any time signature that is ternary, any 3-note subdivision will not be triplets because we have a 3-note subdivision natively. So finally, what about an odd time signature like 7/8, where it is neither quarter notes nor dotted quarter notes, which correspond to the beat? Well, for subdivision purposes, we use the note as it appears in the time signature, 8th notes. There are 7 8th notes to the bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They are written as 8th notes. They correspond to, are represented by 8th notes. So that provides the determination of all the subdivisions. An 8th note divides in half, so a 2-note subdivision in 7/8 would correspond to 16th notes. A 4-note subdivision in 7/8 would correspond to 32nd notes. It's the same process of division, it just begins with an 8th note. So we can absolutely have triplets in 7/8, but if you're having 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5 and a 6 and a 7 and a in 7/8, they have to be 16th note triplets. Okay, because the native subdivision would be 2 16th notes per 8th note. We want 3, we have to use a tuplet to achieve that. Now, I appreciate that tuplets can be a little bit confusing. As I have said, I will dedicate a video later on to their study in more depth, but I wanted to discuss them here to show the link between tuplets and subdivisions, because tuplets are perfectly valid and necessary subdivisions. They're just a little bit more advanced in what you can do with them and how they work. So I hope this has been of value to some of you. Thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you on the next of these talks. Thank you very much.